I had never really suspected anything, at least not until she started volunteering at that late-night charity event. I'd always admired her desire to help others, but recently something felt off. She started volunteering more often, always, coming home late with that tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first I brushed it off. It was for a good cause after all, and it didn't hurt that she was out of the house more often. But one night she came home later than usual. When she kissed me, her lips were cold, distant, like she'd just returned from a place I wasn't allowed to know about. She'd been leaving on Thursday nights, claiming the event lasted longer than expected. I thought nothing of it at first. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice subtle things that didn't add up. The clothes she wore were more polished, expensive, trendy, perfectly styled. Not exactly what you'd expect for a late-night charity event. And the perfume? More floral, more exotic, like she was trying to cover up something. Or maybe it was just my mind racing. She would leave the house dressed up, like she was heading to a nightclub rather than a fundraiser, and every time I'd ask what she did, that night she'd give me vague answers. It was great, lots of people, I'm tired, or something equally unspecific. When I asked more, she'd change the subject or claim she was too exhausted to talk. I had a sinking feeling, but I didn't know what to think yet. I trusted her, right? I had no reason to suspect anything. Until that one fateful night. It was a cool Thursday evening. The air was crisp and the streets were empty save for the distant hum of city traffic. I knew she was heading out for one of her usual late shifts, and I didn't want to make her feel guilty for leaving, so I stayed home. But then, curiosity gnawed at me. I didn't want to feel paranoid, but something told me I needed to know more. So, on a whim, I decided to follow her that night. I waited a few hours, and when the clock struck 11, I slipped into my car and made my way toward the charity event's venue. I parked a few blocks down the street, pretending to casually stroll through the empty sidewalk as I kept my eyes on her. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched her walk toward the entrance, a smile playing on her lips. But something was different that night. She wasn't walking alone. There, standing at the entrance, was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a sleek black suit, and had the kind of smile that made my stomach turn. She walked right up to him, a greeting that seemed more intimate than just a casual, hello, and then with no hesitation, they embraced. She even rested her head on his shoulder before pulling away and walking inside with him, their conversation punctuated with light laughter. The world around me seemed to blur as I stood frozen in place, watching them. It wasn't just the fact that she was meeting someone else, it was the way she acted. So natural, so comfortable, as if this was something that had been happening for a long time. I felt my stomach twist into knots as the door closed behind them. Was this just a charity event, or was there something more going on here? My suspicions had turned into something darker. I stayed there for a few moments, standing in the cold shadows, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to know. I wanted to confront her right there and then, but I stopped myself. I wasn't sure what I would do if I did. Instead, I decided to play it smart. I needed answers, but I couldn't rush this. I had to be careful. I didn't want to make her defensive or give her a reason to shut me out. I wanted to gather the truth, all of it, so I could confront her with undeniable evidence. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I didn't bring up the man I saw or the fact that they had looked too close, too familiar. I had to keep it together. But every time she left the house after that, I felt a strange sense of unease. Every text she sent, every late-night phone call, every time she came home a little too happy, everything felt like a lie. I started to look into the charity event itself. It didn't take long to realize that the charity she was working for didn't exist the way she described it. Sure, there was a registered nonprofit under the same name, but when I looked deeper, I found nothing remotely impressive about it. No records of major donations, no large-scale events, nothing that seemed to justify her devotion to it. I couldn't shake the thought that something was off. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I wasn't the kind of person to spy on my wife, but I had no choice. The questions swirling in my mind demanded answers. I found receipts from luxury resorts, places where people don't typically stay for a charity event. I found flight tickets to exotic destinations that didn't match the supposed events she'd attended. The more I dug, the more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. She was living a double life, and I had been none the wiser. But I still hadn't confronted her. I wanted to know what I was dealing with before I made my next move. I needed hard evidence, something that would be irrefutable. I wasn't just going to ask her. No, I needed her to slip up, to expose herself so I could have the upper hand. So I waited. Every time she left for one of her charity events, I would make a mental note of the time. I started tracking her schedule, keeping an eye on when she'd be gone and for how long. The nagging feeling in my chest never stopped, and the more I waited, the more I realized how deep the web she had woven truly was. Every little detail she told me, the small white lies she slipped in, became more significant. It wasn't just about the charity anymore. There was something more, something I wasn't prepared for, but it was becoming more clear with every passing day. Then, a few days later, I heard something that changed everything. I was sitting in the living room when I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to someone, and though her voice was hushed, I could still make out some of what she was saying. It was like the entire world stopped for a moment as I listened. She was talking about her plans for the business they were running together, the charity she had been attending. And then she said something that sent a chill through my bones. She was planning on taking all the business assets in the divorce. I couldn't believe it. All this time I thought we had been partners, both in our personal lives and in the things we were building together. But here she was, making secret plans with someone else, preparing to take everything I had worked for. It was a crushing blow, but it also solidified everything I had been suspecting. She had been using me, and now she was planning to take it all. The betrayal was so much deeper than I had ever imagined. After hearing her secret phone call, everything started to fall into place. My mind raced with the realization that not only had she been lying about the charity, but she was also planning something much more sinister. All those late nights, all those business trips that never quite added up, suddenly made sense. She had been building something I wasn't part of, and I had no idea how deep her deceit ran until now. But what could I do? Confront her without proof? She'd deny everything, twist the situation around, and I'd be left with nothing but more uncertainty. No, I needed to be smarter than that. This wasn't a game I was going to play recklessly. I decided to take a step back and let her think everything was fine. I acted like nothing had changed, like I hadn't heard that conversation, like I hadn't discovered the depth of her betrayal. But inside I was boiling. Every time she walked in with that same fake smile, I had to remind myself that it was a mask she wore to hide what she was doing behind my back. Days passed, and I began watching her more closely. Every phone call, every late-night charity event, every minute she spent away from home, it all added up. I couldn't help but notice how she always seemed to come back with a little more spring in her step, a little more joy in her voice. All the while I was stuck here, clueless and betrayed. Then one night when she came home from another one of her so-called charity events, I made my move. I hadn't planned on doing anything drastic, but the opportunity presented itself. I knew she wouldn't be home until late, and her phone had been buzzing incessantly with messages. I couldn't resist. I picked up her phone, checked the screen, and there it was. Messages with him. The man I had seen her with, the one who had been texting her all those late nights. There were plans in those messages. Plans to meet at the same luxury resort I had seen on her credit card statement. The exact same resort she had gone to, presumably for work, but the receipts told a different story. The messages were filled with flirtations, emojis, and suggestions for future trips. What caught my attention, though, was the one message that felt like a punch in the gut. It was a picture of the two of them from a few days ago, taken in front of the resort, looking cozy, intimate. The caption, "Can't wait to see you again, babe." I stood frozen, staring at the screen. Everything I had been doubting for weeks, everything I had felt in my gut, was right there in black and white. She wasn't just lying to me. She was planning a future with this man. She had even gone so far as to share our private life with him, to take pictures of moments we had spent together and send them to him like some twisted way of rubbing it in my face. I had enough. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the fact that she had planned this for so long and I had been too blind to see it. But there was something else. Something that made my blood run cold. The phone had one final message, one that made my heart race with anger. She was planning to leverage our shared business assets in the divorce. She had been setting up everything to take me down financially, to take everything from me. I was no longer just the betrayed husband. I was now the target of a carefully executed plan, and I had to decide, Was I going to let her destroy me, or was I going to take control of the situation before it was too late? I had to be strategic. I had to outsmart her. I sat down and thought about my options. I couldn't confront her yet, not with the proof I had. It wouldn't do any good, and it might tip her off. No, I needed to play this like a chess match, calculated, deliberate, and ruthless. I decided to start by securing our business. If she thought she could use our shared assets against me, I wasn't about to give her that power. I contacted a lawyer to get advice on how to protect my interests. The lawyer suggested moving the shares of the business to a third party. It was a legal move, and it would ensure that she couldn't take anything from me when the time came. Didn't tell her about any of this, of course. I let her continue with her plans, let her think she was going to get away with everything. But what she didn't know was that I had already set my own plan into motion. The days that followed felt like a blur. I watched her closely, still acting like everything was normal between us while secretly setting my own plans in motion. She went on with her usual routine, charity events, late-night work meetings, and her increasing distance from me. But I was no longer the clueless husband I once was. I was the one in control now. I didn't feel the need to confront her just yet, not when I had all the cards in my hand. What I needed was leverage, a way to make sure that when the time came I could crush her in the divorce. And that's when I thought about the business again. I had always known how much she valued our company, how much she wanted to be a part of it. She had always talked about expanding it, growing it into something bigger. I had never been opposed to the idea, as we had built it from the ground up together. But now, knowing what I knew, I realized that she was probably using that business to control me, her way of keeping me tethered to her. She thought she could use the business against me, but I wasn't going to let her. I had already transferred the business shares to a third party, someone I trusted implicitly. It was a smart move, one that would guarantee she couldn't touch it during the divorce. But I didn't stop there. I needed to make sure she didn't see this coming. I decided to let her have what she thought was her victory. Let her believe that she was going to walk away with everything she wanted. After all, if she thought she had won, she wouldn't be expecting the final blow. It was a game of patience now, and I was playing it perfectly. I watched as she became more confident, more brazen in her actions. She started talking about the divorce as if it was inevitable, as if she had already won. I kept quiet, kept my distance, and watched her every move. The tipping point came one night, when she returned home from another one of her charity events. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and smugness. "I think we both know this marriage is over," she said, as if she were giving me a gift. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, letting her think she had the upper hand. But in my mind I was already 2 steps ahead. The business was gone, she couldn't touch it, and soon I was going to take everything from her. She left the room, presumably to work on the divorce papers. She was already planning what she would say, how she would paint herself as the victim, how she would walk away with everything. But I knew better. The reality was that she wasn't going to get a single dime from me. I let her think she had won for a few more days, but I couldn't wait forever. It was time to reveal my hand, to show her just how badly she had miscalculated. The next morning I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I explained everything, how I had moved the shares, how I had protected myself from her attempts to control me. The lawyer was impressed with the foresight and legal maneuvering. He assured me that I was in a strong position, and that the divorce was going to be much easier than I had anticipated. I didn't give her any warning. The moment the divorce papers were ready, I signed them without hesitation. I didn't care about her emotional reaction. I didn't care about what she thought. She had betrayed me, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I called her into the living room where I had the papers laid out. She walked in, looking as smug as ever. She had probably convinced herself that she was going to get everything, that I would cave in and give her whatever she wanted. But instead of giving her what she expected, I handed her the divorce papers, along with the single line that would cut her to the core. "You've already taken enough from me. Now it's time to lose everything." Her eyes widened. She scanned the papers looking for the familiar signs of financial settlement, the assets, the things she had hoped for. But there was nothing there. It was all gone. She looked up at me, disbelief written all over her face. "What is this? Where is everything? You can't just take everything." I leaned back in my chair, my expression cold. "You thought you could take everything from me," I said. "But you're too late. It's already gone. She stood there, frozen, as reality set in. She had planned everything, thought she had the upper hand, thought she could use me for everything I had. But now there was nothing left for her to take. Her face twisted with anger and she tried to scream at me, to accuse me of playing dirty. But there was no sympathy in my eyes, no emotion in my voice. I had taken everything she had tried to take from me, and now I was leaving her with nothing. As she turned to walk away, I knew that the game was over. She had made her move, and now it was my turn. I had played it perfectly. The silence in the room was deafening. She stood there for a few moments, her hands trembling, her face turning red with fury. I could see the frustration boiling inside her, the realization that everything she had planned, everything she thought she was entitled to, had just been ripped away from her in an instant. Her eyes darted from the divorce papers to me and back again. She seemed to be looking for some sign that this was a mistake, that I'd change my mind or offer some last-minute reassurance. But I gave her nothing. I watched her struggle with the reality of what I had just done. The house, the assets, the business, everything that she had thought was hers by right was now out of her reach. It was all gone, hidden from her, protected from her. She couldn't touch it anymore. She was left with the cold, hard truth. She had lost. I've worked so hard for this, for us, she spat, her voice cracking with frustration. You can't do this. You can't just take everything I've worked for. I didn't flinch, didn't even raise an eyebrow. You didn't work for this. You manipulated me. You used me. And now you get to see what that gets you. Her eyes narrowed with fury, and for a second I thought she might explode. But I had expected this. I had prepared for her anger, her betrayal of the situation. She hadn't counted on my move, hadn't anticipated the way I had turned the tables on her. It had to sting, knowing that all her planning, all her scheming had been undone so effortlessly. She tried to tear up the papers, but I could see she knew it was pointless. She wasn't in control anymore, not now, not ever again. I leaned back in my chair, letting her rage against the unfairness of it all. But in that moment, I was completely indifferent to her anger. Her words no longer held weight, her accusations no longer stung. All I could feel was the calm satisfaction of knowing that I had taken the power back. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and she stormed toward the door. I'm leaving. You'll regret this, she shouted as she slammed it behind her, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. I didn't try to stop her. I didn't need to. She had already lost everything. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet satisfaction. She kept trying to contact me, sending text after text, leaving voicemails, pleading for some sort of reconciliation. At first I considered blocking her out completely, but something told me I should let her think she could get back in. Let her believe for just a little longer that she could regain control. But I knew better. I had already taken everything she could possibly use against me. There was no coming back from this for her. She had been so focused on winning, on manipulating me into giving her what she wanted, that she didn't even realize what was slipping through her fingers. And when it was all gone, all that remained was the sobering truth of her own mistakes. It wasn't long before I received an email from her lawyer, her official request for a settlement. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw it. She had nothing left to claim, nothing left to fight for, and yet she was still. It was almost laughable. She had underestimated me from the start, thinking she could outsmart me, thinking she could outplay me. But I had been one step ahead the entire time. I met with my own lawyer to finalize the details. There was nothing to dispute. It was all straightforward. She had walked away with nothing. I had protected myself, and now I was free to move forward with my life. The day the divorce was finalized, she tried to make one last attempt at manipulation. She showed up at my door looking disheveled and desperate. She was crying, begging me to reconsider, to go back to the life we had once shared. But I could see it for what it was, a desperate plea from someone who had nothing left. She had lost everything, and she knew it. I'll never find anyone like you again, she sobbed. You can't just walk away from all we've built. Please don't do this. I stood there silent, watching her crumble in front of me, and as I looked at her, I realized something I had never truly acknowledged before. She had never loved me. She loved the control, the power, the status that came with being married to me, but it had never been about me. Not really. You're right, I said, my voice steady. You won't find anyone like me. And that's your biggest problem. She fell silent, unable to respond. There was nothing more for her to say, nothing more for her to take from me. She had lost, and there was no coming back from that. I closed the door behind her without another word. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The weight of the marriage, the constant manipulation, the lies, everything had been lifted. It was over, and there was nothing left to hold me back. I had won, and she would never get the chance to try and take everything from me again.